Have you ever found yourself in a relationship, yet felt more alone than if you were truly by yourself? You sit across the dinner table. There's someone there, maybe even a familiar face, but the silence between you feels heavier than words. The conversations, when they happen, circle the same old frustrations. No resolution, no warmth, just tension. In those moments, a quiet voice inside starts to whisper, "I'd rather be alone than feel invisible." If that thought has ever crossed your mind, or if you felt it without saying it out loud, this video is for you. Today, we're going to walk through 10 subtle but powerful signs that a man has chosen peace over partnership. Not out of weakness, not from bitterness, but as a deliberate, conscious choice. And more importantly, we'll uncover the 7 deep psychological reasons behind that choice, reasons that are rarely spoken about, but felt by many. This isn't about blame. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about understanding the quiet shift that happens inside a man when he decides that peace is worth more than constant conflict. But before we look at the signs on the outside, let's begin within, where the decision truly begins. In the mind and in the heart, there's a moment quiet, often unnoticed when a man begins to withdraw, not with anger, not with bitterness, just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't ask for attention, the kind that says, "I've had enough." That moment doesn't come out of nowhere. It builds, layer by layer, often over years, and behind it are reasons not everyone sees, but most men feel deep down. Let's begin with the first. Reason 1. Emotional wounds that were never allowed to heal. Some men carry the weight of relationships long after they end. They don't talk about it. They don't cry about it. They just carry it. Maybe it was being criticized constantly. Maybe it was being dismissed, ignored, made to feel like nothing they did was ever good enough. These aren't just passing hurts. They leave scars. Scars that silently shape how a man shows up or stops showing up in future relationships. He may smile. He may nod. But deep down, something in him no longer believes connection is safe. Reason 2. The absence of emotional reward. In the beginning, love feels nourishing. You feel seen, heard, wanted. But over time, that can change. What was once intimacy turns into obligation. Conversations become schedules. Touch becomes a routine, or disappears altogether. Without emotional reward, without the feeling that love is a place of renewal, a man stops investing, not out of laziness, but because he feels bankrupt. He's giving, but nothing is being returned. His emotional bank account is overdrawn, and when that happens, peace starts to look more attractive than presence. Reason 3. Exhaustion from repeated conflict. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet warfare, passive comments, tension in the air, arguments that never resolve, or keep returning in different forms. At some point, a man begins to understand that no amount of words will fix what's broken. And when he realizes that, he stops speaking, not because he's hiding, but because he's protecting what's left of his peace. He learns that silence is softer than shouting, and distance is gentler than constant correction. The quiet becomes a form of survival. Reason 4. A shift in the definition of happiness. When he was younger, happiness may have meant finding the one, building a home, sharing holidays, having a picture-perfect life. But now, it's different. Now, happiness looks like stillness, drinking coffee in the morning without criticism, reading a book without tension in the room, listening to his own breath and knowing he's enough. He's no longer chasing approval or a role to fill. He's not trying to fix anyone. He's not trying to be fixed. He's choosing a simpler kind of happiness, one that doesn't require anyone's permission. Reason 5. Unspoken emotional trauma. Sometimes, what looks like distance is actually damage. Not always from the current relationship, but from something buried long ago. Maybe he grew up in a home where love was conditional, Maybe he watched his parents fight endlessly. Maybe he learned early on that love equals pain. These invisible wounds, depression, anxiety, even PTSD don't always scream. They whisper. They whisper things like, "You're not safe. Don't trust too much. Protect yourself first." So he does. By pulling away, by choosing quiet over connection, not because he doesn't want love, but because part of him never learned how to feel safe in it. Reason 6. A loss of personal control. For many men, freedom is sacred. Not just physical freedom, but emotional space. The ability to think, decide, and act without being micromanaged or minimized in relationships where they feel constantly corrected, questioned, or dismissed. That freedom erodes. Every decision becomes a negotiation. Every preference becomes a debate. And when a man feels like he's lost control of his time, his choices, his voice, he starts reclaiming it in the only way he knows how. By stepping back, not to dominate, not to manipulate, but to breathe again. Reason 7. Peace is no longer a wish, it's a conscious choice. Eventually, peace becomes something a man doesn't just desire, he demands. He no longer sees it as a luxury, he sees it as a necessity. He's not escaping, he's not avoiding, he's choosing, with clarity, with maturity. He chooses fewer conversations if they always lead to conflict. He chooses alone time over emotional chaos. He chooses the quiet room, the solo walk, the long drive, because in those spaces, he rediscovers who he is. And in that rediscovery, he learns peace isn't the absence of love. Sometimes, it's the presence of self-respect. He's not broken. He's not cold. He's just finally listening to the version of himself that says, "I matter too." And once that voice is heard, once that boundary is felt, it's hard to go back. Not because he's stubborn, but because he's awake. He understands that some relationships cost more than they give, and in that calculation, he finds his answer not in anger, not in bitterness, but in balance. He doesn't slam the door. He doesn't yell, "I'm done." He just stops showing up to the war. Because for him, peace isn't a retreat. It's a return to self, a return to stillness, a return to the man he forgot he could be. And when the mind has let go, the body follows. Small habits change, reactions soften, priorities shift, and day by day, a man who once fought for connection now chooses something else: sanity, silence, simplicity. Not because he gave up on love, but because he finally understood that not all love feels like home. There's a quiet kind of transformation that happens when a man stops fighting to be understood and starts choosing to understand himself. It doesn't come with drama, no loud declarations, no big, bold exits. It begins in the subtle shifts, the everyday choices, the softened responses, the moments of silence that once would have been filled with frustration. If you look closely, these signs are always there. Clear, simple, unmistakable. Sign 1. He no longer engages in arguments. Even when provoked, where he once raised his voice, now he just exhales. Where he once explained, defended, pleaded, he now says nothing, not because he doesn't care, but because he's learned that not every fire is worth feeding. He chooses calm over control, stillness over struggle. Winning the argument used to matter. Now, protecting his peace matters more. Sign 2. He spends more time alone and doesn't feel lonely. There's a difference between isolation and solitude, and this man knows it well. He doesn't retreat to escape the world. He retreats to return to himself. A quiet walk, an afternoon reading, a weekend off the grid. These moments no longer feel empty. They feel restorative. Time alone has become his sanctuary. Not a punishment, a preference. Sign 3. Rejection no longer shakes him. Where once a harsh word or cold shoulder could ruin his day, now it passes through him. He's released the grip of expectation. He no longer measures his worth by how someone else reacts. If he's overlooked, ignored, or misunderstood, he doesn't chase explanation. He lets it be. Disappointment, when it comes, lands softly because he expects less, not from bitterness, but from emotional maturity. Sign 4. He isn't looking for a new relationship to fill the space. There was a time when being alone felt like failure, like something was missing, like someone needed to arrive to make life whole again. Not anymore. He no longer scans the room for potential. He doesn't swipe endlessly. He doesn't flirt to feel alive. He's content as he is. If love comes, it must meet him where he's already whole, not where he's empty. Sign 5. He prioritizes his mental and physical well-being. Instead of pouring energy into constant compromise, he pours it into self-repair. He moves his body. He eats to feel strong. He wakes early. He reads often. He breathes deeply. It's not a sudden obsession. It's a quiet ritual, a personal devotion. Where he once showed up for others at the cost of himself, now he shows up for himself without apology. Sign 6. He stops trying to prove himself. He used to work so hard to be seen, to be right, to be enough. Every conversation was an arena, every silence a judgment, but not anymore. He doesn't need to win. He doesn't need to shine. He no longer defines himself through someone else's eyes. He speaks when there's something worth saying. He listens more. And when he's misunderstood, he lets the misunderstanding stand, not because he's given up, but because he no longer needs validation to feel real. Sign 7. He embraces quiet spaces and minimalist living. The clutter is gone, both physically and emotionally. He no longer fills his environment or his calendar with noise. His home is simpler now. His phone rings less. His conversations are fewer, but deeper. He doesn't need the chaos to feel alive. He doesn't need attention to feel affirmed. The quiet, once intimidating, is now his grounding place. Sign 8. He avoids toxic conversations and emotional games. He's not interested in power struggles, not interested in winning a discussion or decoding passive-aggressive jabs. When conversations turn manipulative, when tension rises without resolution, he disengages, not rudely, not dramatically, just gently, exits. He protects his emotional bandwidth, the way some protect their bank accounts. He spends it wisely, only where it enriches. Sign 9. He cuts contact with his ex. Even when the door is still open, there may still be occasional texts, casual, "How are yous?" familiar invitations. But he doesn't respond, not because he holds a grudge, but because he's let go completely. The connection no longer carries weight. The pull is gone. The cycle is broken. He doesn't revisit the past out of boredom or weakness because he no longer needs old comfort at the expense of new clarity. Sign 10. He feels a sense of freedom, imagining a future without a partner. This is the clearest sign of all. Where once the thought of growing old alone might have felt sad, now it feels peaceful. He imagines mornings on his terms, nights in quiet, decisions made without debate, a life not empty but expansive. This doesn't mean he's against love. It means he's released the need for it to define him. He can welcome a partner, but he doesn't wait for one to feel whole, and if no one comes, he's still enough. These signs don't appear overnight. They unfold slowly, over months, sometimes years. Each one is a step away from emotional survival, and a step towards self-possession. But the real question isn't whether these signs are good or bad. The real question is deeper. When a man chooses peace over partnership, is he healing or is he hiding? Is this a return to himself or a retreat from pain? Only he can answer that, because peace, as powerful as it is, can sometimes wear the same mask as avoidance. And true healing requires not just silence but truth, not just distance but understanding. So if you see yourself in these signs, ask gently, am I protecting my peace or avoiding the work of connection? There is no shame in choosing solitude, but if the choice is born from fear, from unspoken hurt, from old wounds still bleeding, then maybe the journey isn't over. Maybe peace is only the beginning, not the end. At some point, every man who chooses peace must pause and ask himself why. Is this peace I'm choosing real, or is it just the absence of pain? Am I healing, or am I hiding? Is my silence a path to clarity, or just a shield I've built to avoid feeling too much? These are not questions for others to answer. Not for a partner. Not for friends. Not for the past. They're for you, and only you. And answering them takes more than just thinking. It takes honesty, repetition, practice. One of the simplest things you can do is start writing. 1 page a day. Nothing fancy. Just truth. How you feel when you wake up. What memories linger. What you miss. What you don't. Over time, those pages reveal patterns. And patterns tell stories. Stories you may not have realized you were still living inside. Talk to someone who understands not in theory, but in experience. A man who's been where you are. Maybe he's divorced. Maybe he walked away from something that looked perfect on paper. Sit with him. Ask the questions you've never dared to say out loud. Sometimes, the most healing moments come not from answers, but from being understood. And most of all, test your truth. Spend a weekend without distractions. No phone. No social media. No pretending. Ask yourself, if no one was watching, who would I be? What do I truly want? Do I want to reconnect? Or have I finally found something I'm not willing to compromise again myself? Whatever the answer is, let it be yours. Not society's. Not your family's. Not even your former selves. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to grow. And you're allowed to choose again. Because peace isn't just a destination, it's a mirror, and when you look into it long enough, it reflects back not just what you've escaped, but what you still long for. And if you're walking this path right now, this space between letting go and letting be, remember this: you are not alone. Not in your silence. Not in your questions. Not in your choosing. If anything you've heard today feels like a reflection of your own experience, if even one sentence felt like it was speaking directly to you, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment, share your thoughts. Your story matters, and someone else out there may need to hear it. Just like you needed this. This channel is here for you when you're ready. When you want clarity, when you want peace, when you want real conversations about the psychology of men, healing from within, and building relationships that feel like home, not obligation. So if that journey speaks to you, subscribe. Not because you have to, but because deep down, you know you're ready for more than survival. You're ready for truth. You're ready for yourself. And when that moment comes, we'll be right here.